There's no question that this is a danger. The US is flirting with, with fiscal calamity here with this bill, with the massive build-up in debt that it involves.
In the past 24 hours, Musk has called for the impeachment of the president, whilst Trump has threatened to cancel the government's contracts with the billionaire's companies. Let's speak to Gerard Baker, editor-at-large at the Wall Street Journal, who's in the studio here with me. Gerard, you wrote your column on this subject, fascinating read as ever, and I want to talk about the big, beautiful bill at the heart of this row. But we've seen today Elon Musk perhaps sort of pulling back a little bit, maybe reaching out to Trump having none of it. Where does this row go next, in your view?
Well, so look, Kathy, I think the first thing to say is that this was probably the most predictable bust-up, perhaps the most predictable bust-up in history since the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact of 1939. This was obviously going to be a relationship, two massive egos, both sort of vying for the spotlight and vying for power. And it was probably always going to end in tears. I don't think many of us saw it ending just quite as dramatically and quickly and deteriorating quite as extraordinarily as it did last night, as we saw. But clearly it is going in that direction. Look, I think from what I've just been hearing, and I've been talking to some people in Washington too in the US rather, about this in the last few hours, I think Musk is keen to de-escalate. I want to be careful what I say. I think Musk both men are very sort of emotional, and as people have pointed out, this is kind of breaking up is hard to do phenomenon. And they both.
If they were women, they'd be described as hysterical, wouldn't they?
I wasn't going to go there. I wasn't going to go there, Kathy. But it does have that sort of a Mean Girls quality to it when somebody gets pushed out of the group. But I mean, I think that so I think that there's a lot of emotion. I think with Elon, and there's been a lot of reporting on this, so I'm not saying anything kind of completely out of range. I think some of it is chemically driven, if we can put it that way, with Elon. I think he does, he especially late at night, he tends to be, quite hyperactive.
Well, there was New York Times, to be clear, there was the New York Times report about his use of ketamine.
I should say, forgive me, since you mentioned the New York Times, I'm with the Wall Street Journal. We won a Pulitzer Prize this year for our coverage of Elon Musk, including his extraordinary and bizarre private life. So there's definitely, there's an eccentricity, if we can put it at least that way, about Elon. And he says things and does things that are absolutely extraordinary, extreme. We've seen that throughout his career. And I think he is a little bit maybe regretful about about where, as far as he went last night. And I think he's particularly concerned, from what I hear, that, he is a little bit vulnerable. I mean, partly because of some of these things we've been talking about, including a well-documented record of drug use and other things like that, question marks, which some on the MAGA right have always questioned whether or not he actually came into the country legally in the first place, or whether he is, in irony of ironies, himself perhaps an illegal immigrant. That's the claim that's been made, I should stress, by some on the right. So, I think there's some nervousness there. And by the way,
he has more to lose than Trump in this row.
Without any question. I mean, his stock price was down 15% yesterday afternoon. It's come back a little bit today. But, he's lost, that row last night wiped about $20 billion off his personal wealth. So he has more to lose. Trump, Trump loses potentially, the money that Musk could spend, on his political campaigns. But I don't think Trump won because of Elon Musk's money last year. Trump would have won anyway. So it's an asymmetric relationship. Musk has a lot more to lose. He's trying to make up. And I think, to sort of extend the Mean Girls analogy, Trump is being the one who doesn't answer the phone and is kind of indicating to his friends, I'm not interested in any kind of a rapprochement. Let him come to me. I
think you should extend this Mean Girls metaphor into another column. But just to sort of balance it up a bit, there is the big, beautiful bill, which Elon Musk took aim at. His criticisms of that bill are shared by quite a lot of Republicans, aren't they? And you had some amazing figures in your column about the fact that it would add $2.4 trillion to this massive American debt pile, and the worry that Donald Trump could turn out to be America's Liz Truss.
This Musk is absolutely right. I mean, as you say, as are many Republicans, and indeed many in financial markets, they're very concerned about this bill. This bill, thank you, for pointing it out. As I said in my column, will add, there are various estimates, but the sort of central estimate is about $2.5 trillion over a 10-year period. Now, that's that's adding, to be clear, that's adding $2.5 trillion to already massive deficits, which were going to grow anyway, even without any further tax cuts or spending that the administration is going to do, meaning that the total US debt would rise to about $60 trillion in the next 10 years, which would be something like 1.5 times American income. When Greece didn't default, but came close to defaulting on its debt in 2010, and we had the euro crisis, that was roughly the number, that was about the scale of the Greek debt relative to its GDP.
Yeah.
So now, US isn't Greece, and there are lots of reasons why we won't see something like that, but there's no question that this is a danger. The US is flirting with, with fiscal calamity here with this bill, with the massive build-up in debt that it involves. And there are Republicans, the bill has passed the House, it's got to go through the Senate. There are Republicans in the Senate who are going to oppose it and are going to demand further spending cuts. So yeah, so Musk is right that it is a monstrosity, or whatever it was he called it, an abomination as he called it.
And you have a really interesting quote from the JP Morgan boss, Jamie Dimon, saying that the bond market will crack under the weight of debt. And he says, I'm telling you it's going to happen and you're going to panic, meaning the bond market. I mean, very similar to the Liz Truss terrain.
And again, I don't want to overdo the analogy with Liz Truss. As I said in my column, very few prime ministers sort of make it into the American consciousness. Churchill, Blair, and Thatcher, and it's kind of odd that you're seeing Liz Truss of the 49 Days, kind of making that kind of effect, if you like. But there is that concern. Look, I don't think the demand for US assets is so great that the UK is obviously a much smaller economy. The amount of UK asset, the demand for UK assets is much smaller and much more volatile and much more vulnerable to market movements than the US. The dollar, despite its decline in the last few months, remains the global reserve currency. So I don't think you're going to see the bond markets do what they did to Liz Truss in 2022 by sort of forcing a change. But as Jamie Dimon, the chairman and chief executive of America's largest bank, JP Morgan, said, there is at some point, a bond market crack up is coming. I interviewed yesterday Ray Dalio on my own podcast, who's the chairman of Bridgewater, the largest hedge fund in the US, who says the US is headed for a classic fiscal crack up, which will result in a bond market reaction. Yeah. And if bond yields have gone up a little bit in the last few months, if they were to go up much more significantly, I think that would induce something of a panic. So again, while I'm not in any way predicting anytime soon a Truss moment for the US economy, there is no question that at some point the bond market is going to say, we can't take any more of this US debt at these interest rates. They're going to demand a much higher interest rates, just as they did with Britain in 2022, and that would be devastating for the US economy.
And devastating for Trump, perhaps. Gerard Baker, editor-at-large at the Wall Street Journal, thank you very much for joining us.